His was the only boat to arrive.
I think maybe it was a cow. I don't know.
There's the thank you letter from Lyndon Johnson.
There was even a monorail at one point to the east of us.
Plus, everybody forgets about pirates.
This is the coolest field trip I have ever been on.
I don't know, but I've been told, keep on dancing, won't ever get old.
Hello and welcome to the Long Island History Project, the podcast that brings you stories and interviews with people passionate about Long Island history. You can hear them all at longislandhistoryproject.org. My name is Chris Kretz, and I am your host. And our opening music is courtesy of the Homegrown String Band. Today is the first of what we hope will be a series of episodes where we get to surround ourselves in the voices of the past. We're going to be taking a deep dive through a number of oral history collections across the island, those that have been digitized by the Long Island Library Resources Council. If you're not familiar with them, they are a tax-exempt, not-for-profit organization chartered by the New York State Board of Regents. They work to support libraries, museums, and like institutions on the island. For full disclosure, I've been a board member in the past. I work with them closely, so this is going to be a fun ride. We are going to start with Manhasset Public Library on the North Shore, but we are going to fall Inception-like into the past, unraveling how an oral history collection gets saved, what the dangers are in terms of copying material, keeping the record alive. You're going to meet a lot of people, you're going to hear a lot of voices, but let's start with my co-host on this project, the man with a plan, today's very special guest.
Hello, my name is Robert Anen. I've been Little Rick's project archivist since 2022 and work on all sorts of archival collections that are housed in libraries, museums, and historical societies all across Long Island. These projects are all take up about 6 weeks at a time, and they could be any type of collection, from film collections, scrapbooks, photographs, postcards, yearbooks, and oral history collections. The last one being the reason I am here today.
Great. Just as a stray thought, do your parents understand what your job is?
Not really.
I'm right there with you. When I say academic librarian, it's I can see their eyes glaze over.
Yeah, they have come to a few events that I've done over the years when I speak for Little Rick at archives conferences and stuff like that. But I am constantly working on my elevator pitch for my job that I feel like I've gotten better at, but it's still not perfect because sometimes. Most of the time, people hear the word history or archive, and again, like you said, their eyes glaze over. So,
well, you're the perfect man for the job tonight. So we're talking about oral histories. We're diving into the work you've done with a number of libraries on Long Island and institutions on oral histories. Can you let's back up a little bit, though. Do you want to give us a little bit of your background, how you got into archives and audio work?
Yes. So. I am Long Island raised, and I was a film student at Hofstra University, got my BA in film studies and production, but by the time I had finished that, I had realized that I didn't want to make movies. You have to have a certain type of drive that I just didn't have. And then a few years went by, and then I found the NYU's Moving Image Archiving and Preservation program at NYU. It's on the NYU campus in Washington Square Park. And that's a 2-year master's program that I started in 2015 and graduated from in 2017. And they teach you how to preserve and archive moving image material. So anything from a film to a GIF, that's what we focus on. There were no classes on audio preservation, unfortunately, because you can only cram so much into 2 years of a very intense master's program that I sometimes look back at and don't know how I survived. But yeah, no, it's one of the things I love working with when I got the chance to, and I'm always searching out oral history collections to work on as a Little Rick employee, because those pieces of technology, audio cassette tapes, I know a lot of people are familiar with them, but when it comes to preserving and digitizing them and then making them accessible, it's just one headache after the other if you don't actually handle them all the time or at all.
We're starting with the Manhasset Public Library, and you tell me if I have any of these facts wrong, but it seems there are recordings made in 1953 or starting in 1953 of local residents. We're talking about people who were born in the 1870s. When you came into this project, what format were the recordings in that you heard that you were going in to help them with?
Okay, so when I come across a collection like this, the tapes are generally the standard audio cassette tape that most of us are familiar with. Now, the only reason that these recordings from 1953 were on cassette tapes, because it was very common in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, in order to preserve a reel-to-reel recording, which is like the father of the audio cassette, you would copy a reel-to-reel tape onto a cassette to make it easier to listen to. And so these recordings from 1953 had already been preserved once when someone made a copy of that reel-to-reel tape and put it on an audio cassette tape. So in 1953, you could, you could purchase, if you were, say, like maybe slightly above middle class, or maybe like upper middle class, you would have had the financial ability to purchase a reel-to-reel tape recorder, which is basically, it looks like a deconstructed cassette tape. There are two reels of audio that are separate from each other that you then have to listen to it. You have to then wind the tape onto the deck, onto another reel, and then hit play, and then the tape moves, from reel to reel. Mm-hmm. And then you hear the music or the audio that way. And when I was working on this, I was really fascinated by the fact that Ruth Cowell, the first librarian of the Manhasset Public Library, was essentially way ahead of her time in terms of recording oral histories, because oral history collections didn't essentially start popping up until the invention of the audio cassette tape. Really started booming in terms of like projects that local histories did or libraries did. When I was doing the research to create this landing page that you see when you go on New York Heritage for the Manhasset Public Library Oral History Collection, it turned out that the library had all the original like typed out minutes or some sort of notebook from the library meetings from 1953. So I was going through them and I actually figured out how this all came to be. There was a Manhasset resident who was part of like this active seniors group in 1953, and he had purchased a reel-to-reel tape recorder at the time. I don't know his first name, but I think his last name was Bollinger, Mr. Bollinger. So at some point, him and Ruth Cowell and some senior citizens at the time, and whose recordings are available in this collection, got together, and Ruth Cowell is the woman interviewing them in these recordings.
We're going to interview Mr. Ernest Willits. Mr. Willits, would you please tell me how long you've lived in Manhasset?
Well, I was born in Manhasset in 1884.
So when you came in, they had copied the reel-to-reel to the cassettes. Did they still have the reel-to-reel?
No, because I would have used those. I would have used that had I had the reel-to-reel recordings. Now, they hopefully they pop up one day, because I'd love to see. I'd love to just redigitize these. But I think they sound pretty good. But if you do have reel-to-reel audio tapes or even cassette tapes from when they hit the market in about 1969, 1970, the tape fidelity, like the oral fidelity on those tapes, is so good. I mean, really? If a tape is stored well and it's digitized well, let's say all the machinery works properly, it sounds crystal clear, spooky, real.
Even just like the age of it, it doesn't, like how fast does the information degrade on the tape over time?
Well, listen, that's why I said if a tape is stored well.
Okay.
So if you keep these things in your basement or attics, so for anyone listening, I like to make this little announcement. Like if your audio tapes or videotapes or home movies, so films, are in your attic or your basement, please pull them out and put them in a hall closet on the ground floor, because the thing that affects material like this are the seasonal changes in your attics and basements. So you just want your material to stay in a very stable environment. So hall closets, closets in your bedroom, stuff like that. It will allow the material to age better over a longer period of time.
When you got your hands on that actual stack of tapes, and first, what do you remember first listening to them? What were your thoughts?
I was blown away by how old the recordings were. Even though the recording is essentially 75 years old, the tape would have probably been 35 to 40 years old, judging by what the tape cassettes looked like. Because having worked with so many tapes over the past 4 or 5 years, I can basically look at a tape and like, oh, that looks like the 80s. If the date isn't written on it, or like, oh, that's from the 90s. And cassettes from the 90s and the 2000s age far worse than cassettes from the 70s and 80s. Only because as time went on and companies made them cheaper to buy, they also made a cheaper product.
So in terms of the archival or the restoration work, actually, would you call it restoration, or what's terminology-wise, what were you setting out to do with them?
So I try and stay away from the word restoring, because I don't technically do that. So I help preserve these tapes by digitizing them and then making them accessible online. And I do is the best I possibly can with the material I'm given and, the software that I have on my laptop for work. And restoration also implies that you are returning a recording back to its sort of original fidelity and what it would have sounded like. We're dealing with these tapes as they are currently. If I do anything to them, it's really just amplifying the volume. Or in the beginning of a recording, if someone is like fumbling around with a microphone for a minute and they're not actually saying anything, then I do cut that out because, our attention spans are short these days. And so I'm not going to put a recording up where you don't hear anything for the first 3 minutes.
And we'll mention there is a transcript, which looks like they were done sort of contemporaneously, or at least before you got to them, somebody had transcribed the conversation.
Absolutely. Whenever I start an oral history project, I ask them if there's any documentation from the original project or transcripts that were written after the fact. And also importantly, if they have photos of these individuals. Because I think it's such a nice thing to add. And then once I'm finished with the project, they are uploaded to New York Heritage, which is it's nyheritage.org. It's a digital collections platform for New York State that is run by these library councils in New York State. And so once they're up there, I then do my best to return the recordings, the digital versions that are up on the website, to the descendants of those families.
Ah, that's nice.
Yeah, I just don't feel like the work is done when I finish a project. And listen, if there was a lost recording of like my great grandfather or something, and I didn't know about it, I would want someone to do the little legwork that's sometimes involved to get it to me. And that's really the most rewarding part of the whole job.
So now that Rob has set us up, let's head to the North Shore, where I sat down with two more very special guests.
Hello, my name is Maggie Gough, and I'm the director of the Manhasset Public Library. I have been here since 2011, and I've had the pleasure of working with my archivist, Antonia Mattheou, for the last, I would say, 10 years?
10 years.
10 years. So we, thanks to her excellent skill and guidance, have been able to take a very confused collection and organize it and bring it to the point where we're speaking to you today about the wonderful work that we were able to do digitizing these oral histories.
What's your basic geography lesson for this area for Manhasset? How would you describe it?
Well, I would say that the main thoroughfare is Northern Boulevard. And you've got two intersecting streets, which are a community drive, then you have a Shelter Rock Road, and then you have Shearingtown Road. So it's sort of like all those three thoroughfares are going right into Northern Boulevard, which sort of is skirts the whole Manhasset other than the shoreline. So we're right on the coastline of the bay, Manhasset Bay. We are opposite Great Neck, and we are framed by the probably, I would say, Glen Cove on the other peninsula area. So we're sort of right in the middle, and we're also on the highest point, the library, on the North Shore. So you have quite the hills and valleys. You have a wonderful collection of streams and inlets around here, some of which still exist, some of which have been drained. And you have an opportunity for a wonderful growing area. So you had a very fertile, very large farms and fields here for a couple of decades, centuries almost. Mm-hmm. And this was a very desirable area.
I don't know if this would resonate with you, but we've done episodes on the history of the Great Gatsby. So if people know the East Egg, West Egg, you're sort of nestled at the base of the East Egg and West Egg.
That's correct.
I am Antonia Mattheou, and I am the consulting archivist for the Manhasset Public Library. I started working here close to 10 years ago, and it's an experience every time I'm here.
We're speaking with Rob Anen, and we wanted to start with this collection because from what he said and from what I've been able to tell, these recordings seem to be some of the earliest memories of Long Island preserved.
These interviews were done in 1950s and in 1980s by the then library director, Ruth Cowell.
Was she the first librarian here? What would you want to tell people about Ruth Cowell? What should we know?
If it were not for her, there would not be a library. From the records that we've read and the projects that she instituted, she seemed like she was a good librarian. She did everything from making coffee to directing the library to ordering books, and that's what it was back then.
How much have you listened of this collection?
I haven't listened. I read all of them.
The transcripts. Okay.
The transcripts, and it's easy for me to read than listen to, and not as time consuming. And I enjoyed each and every one of them. You know, the information that I got from these interviews, I did not know.
Actually, we're going backwards here. We have the second topic, dirt roads. In Northern Boulevard, it was a toll road. Okay. Do you remember anything special about that?
Well, the worst that I remember about that is the farm wagons being stuck on the hill. I was just at the top of the Spinney Hill. I lived there, and I saw them constantly, especially in the spring. They'd be mired up to the hubs.
Right, and I think there's one gentleman who was I guess he was a youngster, but he was hired to signal the Vanderbilt races coming down Northern Boulevard, like he was holding flags up if they were crashing or like.
Mm-hmm. Now the next heading is sports.
Well,
and we had the Vanderbilt Cup races
Vanderbilt Cup races. I think that the one I remember was in 1906. It
came right through here.
Yeah, it came right through here.
Do you know where it started and where did it end?
Well, the course is 30 miles. I don't know where they started. They used to come down Northern Boulevard, down the hill, up Spinney Hill, and across by Lake Success. In that way and around. The course is 30 miles. I don't know just where they went. They had 2 or 3 here. They had one time they didn't come around here at all. They went out to Westbury by Hitchcock's racetrack, because I know I had a job flagging all those kids around here. They used to have to stand there with a flag every so far apart, and if there was an accident, you'd hold up a red flag, and if there was a slow down, you'd put a yellow flag up, you know, so you could signal back the ones that were coming, be cautious, so they wouldn't have a smash up.
The other thing that they're talking about is the different events that they had and the prominent families that lived in the area. For instance, the Whitney family, how they will have a milk fund once or twice a year, and the milk obviously will go to the school children. And they had 400 employees at the time, and they will have big Christmas parties. They had Christmas dinners for them, and they were very good to the whole community.
The other thing they have, they talk a lot about, and this seems to be perennial, is the weather always seemed to have been more severe the generation before you, because we talk ourselves about it, the winters aren't as bad, but even back in 1953, they're saying the winters were much worse in 1888.
Yeah, 1930s,
right,
and 1800s. They do talk about the different blizzards in detail and how much the area was destroyed and how badly it was for the farms and the animals.
Do you have any comments on the weather in general in the old days? Do you think it's changed a lot in the last few years?
Oh, it certainly has. The winters were very severe then, nothing like we have now.
I remember the blizzard of 1888 very well, because I lived on a house right opposite the Plandome Road School where the Grand Union supermarket is now located. And when the blizzard happened, the roads were entirely covered. It took the people 2 or 3 days to dig themselves out. I remember the blizzard started on a Sunday night, I think, and on Monday morning the ground was covered and we couldn't get out of our door. And we had no school that day, which I was very glad. Now you go ahead.
We went outside and we dug a tunnel. Both ends of the road ran up and down on the other side, and we dug a tunnel the whole length of it, and we could walk right through it.
Oh, I imagine you had a wonderful time.
So, Anthony, as you were listening or reading through these, in general, how much of this is early 1900s, let's say, late 1800s, Manhasset survives in terms of these landmarks or the names of things or physical structures that you can point to? This is the oldest building or something like that. How much in terms of preservation do you think has happened here?
You can still see, they do describe the houses that existed, and usually they will say that house has been demolished now. So whatever existed back then, it may not exist today. We know where the buildings were. And actually, the way they describe it, the area is so detailed that you can actually recreate. Now you have the pieces and you put them together.
It's about halfway up Spinney Hill.
I don't, but I have a pretty fair idea.
It was just about halfway up Spinney Hill.
Halfway up Spinney Hill.
Yeah.
I get a pretty good idea. The town hall, I think you said it was somewhere near the site of the present Gallagher funeral home.
Near that. I don't know the exact spot. It was right along
What did
there.
it look like? Was it a frame building?
An old wooden frame building.
White, I suppose.
Yeah.
One thing that struck me being a homeowner on Long Island, they spend a lot of time talking about how they got water to the houses, how they heated the water, these rams, which is some kind of hydraulic thing that would pump the water. They talk a lot about natural springs and cisterns.
Cisterns. You
Well,
have anything to say about that?
You dig a cistern about 8-10 foot across and about 16 feet deep, and you'd cement it up on the inside, and you'd turn an arch on it, and then they used to catch the water off the houses in the wintertime when it was cold. They'd fill up the cistern, and then they'd shut it off during the summer. Because if a thunder shower came up and that warm water ran in there, it would stir the whole thing up and spoil it. They used to keep the water cold. We used to put things down like we make High's root beer. You put it down in a pail, put it down in the cistern to keep it cold.
But they talk a lot about plumbing in the beginning.
Yeah.
A lot about it and how how much trouble it was in the beginning and how it got better as time went by and simplified.
You know, there's a lot of history you could pull from these.
Right.
So, you know, social history, local history, just business history. They talk a lot of times about banks and the lumber mill that was here. How much money did they make?
Right, and the grist mill.
How much they were paid.
Went down Monday morning to go to work, and I was taking my tools home, and I met Mr. George Lamadou coming out of the...
George was his son, wasn't he?
Yeah, coming in the mill as I was going out. He says, "Hey, where are you going?" I says, "I'm going home." He says, "What's the matter? You're sick?" I says, "No, I'm not going to work for 50 cents a day. It's too hard work." He says, "How much do you want?" I said, $1.50 a day. He says, "Go on back in the mill and keep your mouth shut around the other boys." So I went back, and every time Mr. Lamadou would come in the mill, I'd say, "Don't forget my $1.50. He'd say, "Keep away from me, you'll get it." So we paid every 2 weeks, and I was the second man in line payday, and I wanted to make sure I got the $1.50 a day. So sure enough, I got my envelope with 2 weeks of $18.
And I don't want to leave anything out. So do you have, Anthony, I'll start with you, any notes from like what you saw as the most compelling pieces of evidence or interesting things you found in the interviews and the transcripts?
The descriptions of the streets and the name of the buildings that existed back in the 1800s. And in fact, the grocery stores used to be the communication centers for Manhasset. And, because people will go to get their mail there. Later on, they will go to make a phone call.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Buy groceries at the same time and discuss business with other residents.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me it's a nice piece of information.
And I remember, I don't know if it was Fish. I think Fish is my favorite person in this, but someone talks about, this goes back to the house maybe, but they're talking about most of the heat would be around the stove.
Right.
And in the evenings, the women would sit around the stoves in the kitchen, so a lot of the men and boys would go to the grocery store.
Right.
But we never had any heat, you know. We used to hug the old kitchen stove and the other stove in the living room and when we were kids.
That's the reason all the men used to congregate at the country stores on the night, so that they could sit around the pot-belly stove and spin their yarns, because the women folks around the house would be centered around the living room and the kitchen stove. So the men went out to country stores nights and smoked pipes and chewed tobacco and spun their yarn.
I suppose they did it in Manhasset as they did everywhere else.
Oh, sure.
One of the greatest places in Manhasset for it was Charlie Cole's Corner Shop.
Oh, gee.
Most Manhasset boys got their education up in Captain Charlie Cole's Corner Shop, and he was, for many years, president of the Board of Education.
What a character he was.
And he was a character.
So my question is, how much interest do you see from your patrons in the local history?
A lot. I mean, I was away for 2 weeks and I come back and I'm overwhelmed. I have to come. I'm usually here on Saturdays, only 1 day a week. Now we were discussing with Maggie. I have to come extra.
There's more to do.
More to do.
If you think about this work that Ruth Cowell did with this group in 1953, and I think it went on, right? So it wasn't just 1953, it went up into the 80s. Yeah. Do you see, or are you hoping to do more of that yourselves, or where do you see the role of oral history in your public library preservation collecting efforts?
I think it's wonderful. I mean, we have a young man who's now a high school senior, and he wants to go out and interview veterans. Hopefully we can find a few for him to volunteer and speak. And I think one of the more famous authors from this area who wrote The Tender Bar, I don't know if you know, but The Tender Bar featured his uncle, Uncle Charlie, who was, I believe, a veteran. Okay. So I'm just for saying this is an important part of not only Manhasset history, but our history as a country, and how our views towards our veterans have changed over time. And I think it's important to record that. I think it's important to record the everyday life and experience of people so that we have something to look at and to contemplate.
It will be good to do more oral histories, because I see them as primary sources. You hear the experience of people who lived through events. And as long as Rob is willing to digitize them, we'll keep at them.
And thank you to Rob and Maggie and Antonia. Thank you for letting us weave together the story of the Manhasset Public Library and their oral history collection. We barely scratched the surface. We just mentioned the Whitneys. There's a whole second history of Spinney Hill and the African American community in the area. So we will have links in our show notes. That's at longislandhistoryproject.org. And Rob and I plan to be back. We have a bunch of tape to get through. We have a lot of collections we'd like to highlight, so stick with us. We'll see how far we can get. If you have any questions for Rob or for me, or you just want to share any work you've done on Long Island history or with oral histories, drop me a line at longislandhistoryproject@gmail.com. Our outro music is Capering by the Blue Dot Sessions, used under an Attribution 4.0 international license. And, as always, thank you for listening.